On World News tonight, real fear that nuclear war between India and Pakistan is possible. The drug companies that are accused of paying the competition not to compete, pills and profit and public health. The families of those who died on Pan Am Flight 103, which was destroyed over Scotland. Will they reach a settlement with Libya? The simple procedure that seems to cure the most severe form of diabetes. We'll take a closer look. And the woman who helped so many girls believe anything was possible. She wrote the Nancy Drew series. Millie Benson has died.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight looking out at a very dark horizon in a very dangerous part of the world. India and Pakistan may be on the verge of going to war. And using nuclear weapons is a true possibility. At its heart, this is a war about the disputed territory of Kashmir and its overwhelmingly Muslim population. India says it is Indian. Pakistan says it should be Pakistan or independent. They have fought 2 wars about Kashmir since 1948. If another war started, if it got out of hand and went nuclear, the U.S. believes that many, many millions of people would die. And there is no evidence tonight that India or Pakistan is ready to back down. ABC's John McCarthy picks up the story at the Pentagon. John, tell us first, how worried is the U.S.?
Worried at all levels, Peter, and one of the reasons is the details that they are now seeing on the ground. And one move that is causing concern, intelligence sources tell ABC News that India has now loaded atop a missile conventional warheads. These are the same missiles that sometimes carry nuclear warheads. This is a sign, officials say nearly everyone agrees, that the situation is now very dangerous.
More troops, aircraft, and ammunition are being moved to the front. And today at the United Nations, there was more frightening talk, this time by Pakistan's UN ambassador.
We are ready. And if we are attacked, we shall respond, and we shall respond with our full might.
Pakistan has lost all 3 wars it has fought with India, and U.S. analysts say because it is still outgunned and outmanned by a military twice its size, it would probably lose again. That's why Pakistan clearly signaled today it might be forced to use nuclear weapons first if India attacked with its regular army.
Pakistan has never subscribed to no first use. Never subscribed.
The State Department again urged restraint, underscoring the danger.
Climate is very charged, and a serious conflagration could ensue if events spiral out of control.
Scholars of the region say what they are seeing and hearing today is no longer just big talk.
This is very hairy business that makes kind of the Cuban Missile Crisis potentially look like child's play.
One enormous source of concern to the U.S. is how bad each side's intelligence is on the other. A case in point, those missiles that India is now preparing to load with conventional warheads, the same missiles that could carry nuclear. If launched, Pakistan, of course, would not know what kind of warhead was headed its way. That is the kind of purposely ambiguous signal that U.S. officials fear could lead to a horrible miscalculation.
The situation is now of such growing concern. ABC News has learned that the White House is considering sending to the region Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld for some tough talk if other diplomatic efforts fail. Peter?
As big a political gun as there is in the administration. Thanks very much, John McCarthy at the Pentagon. India and Pakistan have been trading artillery fire for 2 weeks now across what's called the line of control that divides the territory of Kashmir. And as ABC's Jim Sciutto reports from Pakistan tonight, it is getting more intense.
Today, more Indian troops headed for the Pakistan border, where 1 million soldiers already face each other. And the cross-border shelling intensifying. People on both sides are now spending their days in bunkers. They've been firing and shelling from all sides, she says. Dozens of civilians have been killed this week in Pakistan and India. Today, a funeral for a young Indian boy. Indian officials now claim Pakistan is the epicenter of international terrorism, and that Pakistan's President Musharraf has already had enough time to crack down on Muslim militants in his country. The clear implication, India may take matters into its own hands, launching attacks against the militants inside Pakistan. But visiting troops today at the border, President Musharraf warned any strike could escalate into all-out war. A U.S. intelligence report estimates a full-scale nuclear exchange between the two countries would kill up to 12 million people. But such estimates don't enter into the public debate here.
You have a very disturbing gung-ho sense within the militaries of these two countries. You have a trivialization of what nuclear war really means. There is no sane voice in either country which is advocating that, this is stupidity.
Intensive diplomatic efforts are underway to ease tensions. The great fear is that just one more attack in India by extremists could lead events to spiral out of control. Jim Sciutto, ABC News, Islamabad, Pakistan.
And now to some of the big changes in Washington. The FBI Director Robert Mueller and the Attorney General announced a sweeping reorganization of the FBI today. We gave you the basic details last night. The FBI is changing its core mission from law enforcement to fighting terrorism. And today, Mr. Mueller acknowledged for the first time that serious mistakes have been made. Here's ABC's Pierre Thomas.
The FBI director pointed to two specific mistakes.
In the last few weeks, two separate matters have come to symbolize that which we must change.
A July 2001 memo from a Phoenix FBI agent which raised concerns about Middle Eastern men training at flight schools. It was never acted upon.
First is what did not happen with the memo from Phoenix, which points squarely at our analytical capacity. Our analytical capability is not where it should be.
Mueller acknowledged the need for change after reading a blistering letter sent by Minneapolis agent Colleen Raleigh, accusing FBI headquarters of hampering efforts to get a search warrant for the computer of Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker.
And let me just take a moment to thank Agent Raleigh for her letter. It is critically important that I hear criticisms of the organization, including criticisms of me.
Mueller himself pointed to what may be another missed signal. In 1998, an FBI agent in Oklahoma complained about Middle Eastern men taking flight training there. That too didn't go anywhere, and the FBI director predicted there could be more revelations in the coming weeks.
The director said the FBI must do a much better job if it is to prevent the next attack. Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
The national briefing begins tonight in Maryland. After a year and a half, the Osprey aircraft has flown again. The Marines want to build more of the helicopter airplane hybrids, which were grounded after they crashed twice in a year, and 23 Marines died. Marine officials say today the problems have been fixed. The government reports drought conditions on the East Coast have eased considerably after all the rain. Between March and May, parts of the Northeast got 20 inches. The drought, however, is still not over by any means. And in New York City today, the last remnant of the World Trade Center was cut down in preparation for its formal removal from the site tomorrow. The 30-foot steel girder, which remained standing while the towers collapsed, was covered today with a flag and flowers. ABC News will have live coverage of tomorrow's event beginning at 10:25 Eastern Time. There is a study released today by healthcare researchers which finds, or reports rather, 2/3 of the prescription drugs which got new patents in the last 10 years were not really new. This comports with an ABC News study of similar data. And the AARP, which is largely for retired people, said today it is joining lawsuits against prescription drug companies accused of stifling competition. The drugs involved are Buspar, Cador 20, and as ABC's Jackie Judd reports, tamoxifen for cancer.
Rosemary Morgan of Amherst, Massachusetts uses tamoxifen to treat breast cancer. A year's supply at her pharmacy cost $1,300. Morgan blames deal-making by drug manufacturers for that.
It's immoral is what it is. And it's all coming out of the hides of people, real people whose needs are not getting met.
Lawyers involved in the class action lawsuits allege the goal of the drug makers was to prop up prices by eliminating competition from generic manufacturers.
The brand name manufacturer makes payments over a period of time to the generic. And in exchange for that, the generic agrees either not to go into the market or to go into the market selling the brand name's drug.
10 years ago, the manufacturer of tamoxifen, AstraZeneca, gave generic drug maker Barr Laboratories $21 million. In exchange, Barr agreed not to make a cheaper version. Instead, it would market AstraZeneca's product at only a slight discount. Barr's CEO insists this was a good deal for the consumer.
People using this product have saved hundreds of millions of dollars over that 10-year period. It's quite pro-consumer, pro-competitive, and very good for Barr in the country.
AARP counterclaims that all these deals inflated the price of drugs by hundreds of millions of dollars. The drug makers involved all deny any illegalities. These lawsuits are at the very early stages, but they represent a growing trend. As drug costs keep rising, lawyers and consumers are becoming more aggressive about fighting back in the courts. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Washington.
Later this evening on ABC, we'll have what we think is a very important prime time hour on the pharmaceutical drug industry. It is called Bitter Medicine. It is about whether the public is getting value for its money. It's at 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific time and 9 p.m. Central time. When we come back on this broadcast, the families of the people who died in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103. They must now decide whether to accept money for their loss. In other news tonight, the simple procedure that could cure severe diabetes. We'll take a closer look at one patient's experience.
My family jokes that I'm running out of guardian angels because I've been saved just in the nick of time, way too many times.
And also on the broadcast tonight, the woman behind Nancy Drew. She was just as gutsy as the girl whose story she wrote.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Dell.
Pan Am 103. The Libyan government said today it had nothing to do with a multi-billion-dollar offer to compensate the families of those who died when Pan Am 103 blew up over Scotland. It is 14 years ago now. But as ABC's John Yang reports, the Libyan businessmen and the U.S. attorneys working on a deal say it is legitimate.
The Libyan and American negotiators met in these Paris hotels over 10 months to work out the proposed settlement. One of the U.S. lawyers says he is sure the Libyan businessmen are speaking for their government.
I have no doubt that this is a delegation that does have the authority to settle our lawsuit.
In a letter to victims' families, Kreinler says the Libyans will pay $10 million for each victim, $4 million when United Nations sanctions are lifted, $4 million when U.S. economic sanctions are lifted, and $2 million when the State Department says Libya no longer sponsors terrorism. Bert Ammerman, whose brother died on the flight, says the offer should be accepted.
Whether we accept the deal or not, I believe in the next year or two the sanctions are going to be lifted anyhow. So I would rather have a settlement of this magnitude, because I think this is precedent-setting.
Some other families worry the settlement would send the message that nations can pay to get international sanctions lifted. Victoria Cummock, whose husband died on the flight, says Libya is only interested in selling oil.
In payment of $10 million, they want to be able to get away with murder and start trading oil for money.
Secretary of State Colin Powell today called Libya's offer a step in the right direction. His spokesman said they would consider the family's reaction to it, but in the end it will be the government, not the victims' families, who will decide whether to lift the sanctions. John Yang, ABC News, Washington.
In the overseas briefing tonight, 10 million people in southern Africa, the United Nations says, are on the verge of starvation. The report says Malawi, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Swaziland are all looking at famine now. We reported on this 2 weeks ago. The four nations are deep in a drought and hampered by bad economic policies. Together, the United Nations says they will need to import 4 million tons of food in the next year. In the Philippines, the U.S. is now offering a $5 million reward for the capture of those who lead the Abu Sayyaf group. The U.S. says it has links to Al-Qaeda. The group has been holding an American couple hostage for a year. When we come back, a very promising new treatment that may cure diabetes and doesn't involve insulin shots. We'll take a closer look. We're going to take a closer look tonight at an experimental treatment for diabetes that shows enormous promise. Almost 1 million Americans, and perhaps many more, have type 1 diabetes, which is more serious and starts earlier in life than the more common type 2. Doctors are making significant progress treating severe diabetes by actually transplanting cells. In Houston, doctors recently performed the procedure on a 42-year-old woman who was in desperate straits. Here's ABC's John McKenzie.
It's 2:30 in the afternoon, and Judy Guggenheim arrives at the Methodist Hospital in Houston for a transplant procedure that could change her life, perhaps even save her life.
I've pushed the envelope so far on so many times of going into a coma. I can't even count the number of times I've been in a coma because of my diabetes.
Guggenheim has uncontrollable diabetes. She must use a pump to get the insulin her body needs. She must test her blood, pricking her finger 15 times a day, including twice in the middle of the night, every night. And even then, the sugar in her blood can plummet without warning to life-threatening levels.
I can't wait till it's over so I can begin the first day of the rest of my life. I just don't remember anything except for living with diabetes.
At 7:30 that evening, she is wheeled into an operating room and given a sedative to relax. Through a small incision below her ribs, doctors drain a batch of cells into her body.
Do you see these things? Do you see them going through there?
Oh yeah, I see them in the tube. Wow.
More than 500 million cells from the pancreas of a woman who had died the day before. In less than 1 hour, the procedure is over. The effect almost immediate. A check of her blood sugar levels reveal they're already starting to improve.
You are coming down.
Her new cells are now producing all the insulin she needs.
It's truly amazing that they can do what they've done with such a short, relatively simple procedure.
Stabilized at 52. They're working. They are working.
Yeah. To keep those cells working, Guggenheim must take anti-rejection drugs for the rest of her life. Drugs that can make her more susceptible to infection or disease. But for Guggenheim, there's no question, it is worth it.
Now at 42, I can really start, living the life that I've always wanted to live.
While this transplant procedure has been tested on more than 120 patients with uncontrollable diabetes, it will be several years at least before it might be available to other diabetics, in part because of a severe organ shortage.
In the future, if we had an unlimited number of insulin-producing cells that could be grown easily, and the patient could have them implanted without the use of anti-rejection medications, then it would be applicable to a larger number of patients.
For Judy Guggenheim, within 2 days of entering the hospital, she is heading home. And for the first time since she was a teenager, doctors say she has no signs of diabetes. John McKenzie, ABC News, New York.
A question for women. Did you read Nancy Drew? So many girls and women have. When we come back, the woman who wrote her. Finally this evening, Nancy Drew. The mere mention of her name gets the attention of girls and women particularly. Ever since the 1930s, she has been a literary feature in millions of lives. And we learn today that the woman who wrote the first 23 Nancy Drew books has died. Her name was Mildred Benson. She was 96 years old, still writing for the newspaper in Toledo, Ohio, where she had been for most of her adult life. Here's ABC's Dean Reynolds.
Even as a child in Iowa, Millie Benson knew exactly what she wanted to do.
I can't recall a time when I didn't want to write.
She sold her first story at 12.
That made me a writer.
Her life was set.
I just sat down at my typewriter and put a piece of paper in there and let her roll.
There were many novels under an assortment of pen names, but Millie will always be remembered for her stories about Nancy Drew. Writing as Carolyn Keene, she penned the first 23 of the original 30 mysteries, making only $125 for each book. Future profits were not in her contract, and there certainly were future profits. The Nancy Drew series is still in print and has sold 200 million books.
This body was lying about here.
The story's been in the movies and on TV.
We've got to find out what's in that sarcophagus.
3 generations have been captivated by the young girl who could match wits with adults and win.
They actually have a girl doing something instead of a boy all the time.
I just wanted to get away from the mamby-pamby type of books that were being given to children in those days.
There was nothing namby-pamby about Millie Benson. She loved diving from great heights, learned to fly at 59, and was a journalist in Toledo for 58 years, developing some rough edges along the way, as an editor found out when he assigned her to write an obituary prematurely.
The person hadn't died yet. And she went back out to the signing editor and slammed the paper down on his desk and said, "You want me to write obits? You better give me one that's cold."
Though she could barely see her keyboard in later years, she was still producing a monthly column.
I was born wanting to write. I'll probably pick up my pen as the undertaker walks in the door.
The last words she wrote were published today, an appreciation of libraries. Dean Reynolds, ABC News.
That's our report on World News Tonight. We hope you'll join us for our special on the prescription drug industry later this evening, all day tomorrow on ABC, an end to the recovery at Ground Zero. On Good Morning America, the FBI Director Robert Mueller in his first interview since taking office. I'm Peter Jennings. I hope you have a good evening.